Thanks very much, Kathleen, also for the invitation to come here and see her 8 years since we last crossed paths. And she's also highly exaggerating. She's, in fact, the most insightful marketer of all time. My background is actually not in marketing. It's finance and law, both of which I teach at New York University. Is there a problem with the sound? Oh, help to turn it on. Yeah, so I teach law and finance at NYU, and it's interesting because it's a heavily quant-oriented finance school, and finance types sort of like to marginalize marketing and management as sort of soft subjects, which I think is absolutely inappropriate. And in the course of teaching entrepreneurial finance, it's become apparent to me that students have no notion of how appropriate, what's marketing and how important marketing is for success of a company and just generally. So the subject of luxury and China happened pretty randomly. Tend to go to China for business, and the whole China phenomenon is something that is pretty extraordinary, and it blows your mind to witness what's going on. Luxury is something they're consuming with an absolutely voracious appetite. And a student last term suddenly said, could I do an independent study with you about luxury in China? So, I'm not claiming any particular expertise in the subject. It's always good to learn through teaching and working with a student. So we put together a course of readings and just started trying to explore this phenomenon. So this is very much a work in progress, and I think it'll benefit from your insights as well in the Q&A to come up with some sort of robust theory about both luxury, China, how this is something that really has legs and traction in the world of marketing and product development. So the general sort of driving thesis is, we have these things called emerging markets. There's been this sort of secular shift from developed to emerging. You've all heard about the emerging middle class in places like India. And then there's a burgeoning appetite for luxury goods. So the first question is really, what is luxury? And the way we're using the term here is not, buying a microwave or refrigerator for somebody who didn't have one. We're trying to actually isolate it in a more classic sense of how we all understand the term. But whether there's a stable definition of luxury, jury's still out, but I think we can come to certain broad understandings of what constitutes this general concept. There's often an element of price premium associated with luxury, exclusivity or rarity, the fact that luxury brands quite often generate or engender more trust, and also through the global financial crisis in 2008, it's been interesting to see that luxury has been relatively recession-proof. So here's a little mind-blowing event that occurred recently in March 2011 in New York. This vase with peonies and birds, which the experts at Sotheby's estimated to be worth between $800 to $1,200 because they deemed it to be from the Republican period, which is the 20th century, sold for $18 million. And in order for it to go for $18 million, there had to be a competitive bidding process of people driving the price up. The key was this little bits of squiggles called a seal from the Emperor Jianlong, which potentially placed it in this period from 1735 to 1796 as a highly desirable item of porcelain. But the experts at Sotheby's actually thought the seal was fake. Here is another vase from the Guanlong period. This is actually a record-setting vase which this brother and sister in the United Kingdom found in their attic, along with other odds and ends. It was put up for auction in a relatively unknown auction house on the outskirts of London called Bainbridge's, and it fetched $83 million. So it should be patently obvious, and we've seen the statistic multiple times, that in terms of the share of world GDP, we're somewhat in decline, or China's catching up, and there'll be a crossover point. Here the IMF estimates this to be around 2016. This is a map of GDP growth globally, and the dark blue patches are where you potentially are going to have more robust growth, and you'll see that the dark blue is the emerging parts of the world: China, India, Latin America, Central America, parts of Africa, etc., with small exceptions. So for instance, in Latin America, Venezuela is excluded for obvious reasons, and Japan is very much in the red in Asia. So in terms of luxury, if we're going to take a company as a proxy for luxury, LVMH is a global proxy for luxury. In February 2011, they came out with their earnings for the quarter, which were up exponentially, largely driven by the Chinese appetite for luxury goods. As you all know, LVMH is a brand aggregator, but its core brand is Louis Vuitton. But it has a whole host of luxury brands under its umbrella. So let's pause for a bit and just try to explore what luxury represents. So the general concept of luxury, the etymology of the term, goes back to Latin, luxuria, which meant extravagance. It also has a negative connotation. It came to mean lust, which, as you know, is one of the 7 deadly sins. And in the Republican period in Rome, luxury was even thought of as a significant vice. And there were things called sumptuary laws to curb, for instance, how much money one spent on dinners, how people dressed, how many guests you could invite. And part of this luxury censorship was to prevent upstarts from using their ability to buy things and have fancy dinners to get ahead socially. And we've also seen significant anti-luxury movements in the world. So Spartans in ancient Greece, Puritans had an anti-pleasure or luxury aspect to their thinking, ascetics, Amish, etc. So luxury writ large represents concepts of prestige, exclusivity, status goods, where the experience of consumption or being a patron engenders value independently of functional utility. Here are a couple of other familiar images of luxury. The Hermes, iconic orange packaging, along with the Tiffany sort of Robin's Egg blue box, and then the particular products associated with it. That's a Kelly bag, but not just an ordinary Kelly bag. It's a crocodile Kelly bag. I think they around $30,000 for the bag, and there's no Hermes logo that's visible on it. In the Hanskin of the 4 types of consumers, there was a mention of poseurs who will go, look for knockoffs. And there's a very interesting study by a couple of Yale psychologists called Hood and Bloom, who make the argument that authenticity matters at a very, very deep human level. So what they did is they tested 43 young children, 3 to 6 years old, by showing them what they called a copying machine. So the children were led to believe that this machine could create an exact copy of anything they wanted. It's the kind of thing that magicians use, in illusionary contexts. So, for instance, a stretchy man was put in one. The children felt a stretchy man. They put it in one of the machines, and then the same thing popped up in the second one. And the children preferred the duplicate toy 62% of the time, and they didn't worry about the authenticity, that this was somehow a facsimile or copy. The kids were also asked to bring along so-called attachment objects, such as their favorite toy, blanket, stuffed animal. And of the 43, 4 children wouldn't even let their objects near the device to be duplicated. Those who allowed copies almost always refused to see the copied object as equivalent. It was always considered a fake or a bootlegged or counterfeit object. So whilst they were assured that these objects were functionally and to all intents and purposes identical, they intuitively believed that the copy wasn't the same because it lacked certain social history. It wasn't, there was no sentimental attachment to it, and so on. In a similar experiment, by the way, the children were asked to show preferences for objects, a better quality object that nicer looking and less tattered versus one that belonged to Queen Elizabeth. And they all preferred the more sort of ratty looking Queen Elizabeth object. And we know that this is nothing astounding. People pay thousands of dollars for JFK's golf clubs and things like that.